Good evening, class.
Recently, I came across a poser hater unfairly disparaging the work of an artist I greatly admire. He called the picture a 10-click pic, and I thought, is that even possible? So here we go.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
So yes, it is possible to get a decent looking picture in 10 or so clicks, but in this case only because I got a lot of help from this set by Danie and Marforno that includes a lot of pre-coordinated poses, settings, and lights. I think the 10-click pic label stuck with me even though it was completely unfair and unjustified, because it encapsulates what so many people outside the Daz Studio poser world think is wrong with us, with the real problems that we know keep Poser and Daz Studio users from making the best images that they possibly could. The point of this video and all my videos then is to help the beginning artist move past our over-reliance on presets and defaults. I want to help make you aware of the many options available to you as an artist. To that end, this video hopes to provide some quick and dirty tips to liven up the composition of your images.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
Okay, we're going to stick with our 10-click pic and see what we can do to make her a little bit more interesting.
Good evening, class.
This isn't rocket science, but a lot of people just forget that they don't have to shoot a figure from straight on.
Good evening, class.
Shooting from a low angle can make a character look more important, more impressive. As you can see, I'm cheating and using a whole bunch of Postwork, but the more dramatic angle has already made for a more dramatic picture. Shooting from a high angle also adds drama. It can make a character seem isolated, or as if they are fighting against the odds.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
Another easy thing folks forget about is manipulating the Z rotate dial, also called the roll setting in some spots. On the old Batman show, they used to use this trick to make the villains look more villainous. Again, by using an unusual angle, we've added some drama and interest.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
There are a lot of different composition formats out there used by artists and photographers.
Good evening, class.
There are also a lot of good videos explaining when, where, and why you should use them. I'm not going to go into all that here. I'm just picking two, the rule of thirds and the golden mean, and showing you how you can use them to crop your image. What I'm doing is going into a program like Photoshop or GIMP that uses layers.
Good evening, class.
Here I'm taking a rule of thirds overlay that I found on the internet and putting it over my image, lining up the intersection points on the grid lines with points of interest on my image, and then cropping. I then delete the layer with the grid and save my image. One thing I will say about the rule of thirds is that it's not a rule. It's a rule of thumb. It's one possible way to organize your image. It works on the assumption that the eyes will tend to gravitate to these points of intersection. You place your figure in these points where the eye will tend to fall, and you use the points the eyes sweep through to establish context. Provided with figure and context in that order, the brain begins storytelling. Once upon a time there was a beautiful red-haired lady with a big sword in a mysterious shrine. Now we're going to switch our rule of thirds guide to a vertical orientation. If you have to resize your grid, make sure you're using the setting on your graphics program that will keep it from distorting. In Photoshop, this is holding down the Shift key. Using the rule of thirds as a guide does not mean that you can't have an image that's centered on the page. Unfortunately for this example, I got my image crowded towards the top a little, so I came up with what I call a Kentucky Fried Chicken crop. My points of interest were all breast and thigh. Not a bad image, but to preserve my dignity as a woman, let me try another one.
Good evening, class.
Well, I feel much better. Again, this crop focuses our eyes on the figure and lets them sweep gently through the context. I once heard a very good artist give a very bad piece of advice about doing a golden mean crop. He kept saying, just go with what feels right for you. This was fine for him. He was a professional artist. He had a very good eye. Unfortunately, that's the equivalent of a musician with perfect pitch saying, oh, just wait till it sounds right. It's not true for all of us. For example, here's a render I did that I thought would fit the golden mean overlay perfectly.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
I think this is the real value of using these composition guides. They can show you some of your weaknesses. For example, I tend to crowd the top edge and not leave enough negative space in my compositions. Like I said before, these are guides. Even though the rule of thirds is called a rule, it's not a rule, it's a suggestion. Go through and try several. See which one works for your particular image.
Good evening, class.
Each crop leads our eye through the photo in a slightly different way, giving a slightly different feel. Which one works the best is up to you.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class.
A few warnings before I conclude. Following the rules of good composition won't automatically give you a good image. There's a lot of other stuff you can mess up. Neither will it make you immune from criticism. Being aware of your options as an artist and being more thoughtful about the creative choices you make will move you towards relying less on presets and defaults, and will hopefully someday make the label of 10-click pick too ridiculous to utter.
Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class. Good evening, class.